They were Hitler's most elite soldiers, comprising a group that was virtually impossible to catch across Europe. But when the Third Reich collapsed, their real war was just beginning, thanks to all the crimes they had committed. Subscribe now because you won't believe what happened to the group called Waffen-SS after 1945. The collapse. It was May 1945 when Nazi Germany had already fallen. But across Europe, hundreds of thousands of Waffen-SS soldiers were laying down their arms, facing an uncertain future as prisoners, fugitives, men without a country. The Allied powers moved quickly, and orders went out for the total dissolution of the SS and all of its branches, units of the Waffen-SS, from frontline divisions to the auxiliary formations drawn from occupied territories. They were rounded up by American, British, and Soviet troops. Thousands were taken into captivity, wearing the same uniform that had made them the symbols of terror just weeks or even days earlier. The proud warriors who would consider themselves an elite fighting force and invincible fighters were now detained in huge numbers in improvised prison camps across the destroyed Germany. The conditions here were brutal. Most prisoners were kept in open-air enclosures with minimal shelter, struggling with disease, hunger, and complete uncertainty about their future. Allied authorities faced millions of detainees and focused on identifying high-ranking officers or notorious offenders first, but they were very hard to track down. The legal reckoning for them came fast. At the Nuremberg Trial, which was held from November 1945 to October 1946, prosecutors argued that the entire SS, including the military wing, the Waffen-SS, had been a key instrument of the Nazi crime, and they were the ones who encouraged a lot of violence. On the 30th of September 1946, the International Military Tribunal formally declared the SS a criminal organization. The judgment carried huge weight because simply belonging to Waffen-SS could now constitute a crime, even though exceptions were made for some who had served after 1943 or proven to have avoided ideological involvement. The denazification courts were all over Germany, sorting millions of former Nazis into categories ranging from major offenders to just followers. For Waffen-SS members, though, verdicts depended heavily on rank, theater of service, and local politics, which made it worse for them. A few well-known figures faced serious consequences. For example, the SS brigade leader Kurt Meyer of the 12th SS Panzer Division was tried and imprisoned for atrocities in France and Belgium. Others faced military tribunals for their role in Italy, the Balkans, or even the Eastern Front. But most low-ranking men were released within months, and their records were marked, and their reputation was destroyed, but their lives were largely intact, and they faced no criminal charges at all. However, this was just the start. The escape routes. Not everyone stayed to face judgment because some of the Waffen-SS members were way too scared. A minority chose to run away, and with forged papers, along with sympathetic networks, numerous ex-Waffen-SS officers escaped Europe altogether. This included Karl Nicolucci Lech, a former Panzer SS member and commander, who reached Argentina in 1948, where he made a quiet life under Juan Perón's regime, which welcomed former Nazis with technical skills and military experience. Similar routes were taken by other Waffen-SS soldiers to Spain, Syria, and Egypt. These escapes later fueled the stories of Nazi rat lines, organized escape networks allegedly run by sympathetic clergy, intelligence services, or fascist sympathizers. The extent of these networks still remains partly documented and debated by historians, but for those who stayed in Germany, the early post-war years brought a lot of disillusionment. The name Waffen-SS had become so synonymous with brutality and fanaticism that veterans were excluded from pensions and even official war grave commemorations. Then came 1948. When Germany's new political authorities, which were still under Allied supervision, considered the Waffen-SS a criminal entity and not a legitimate branch of the armed forces like the Wehrmacht. In less than 3 years, a force that had numbered nearly 1 million men was reduced to scattered individuals, each facing judgment or complete silence. Their collective reputation was sealed at Nuremberg, but their individual fates were only beginning to unfold, and the fate wasn't the best that you would think of. Reintegration. Then came the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany in May 1945, which was a huge turning point. The country's first leader faced rebuilding society while dealing with a population that included hundreds of thousands of former Nazi Party members and soldiers. However, amongst them were many ex-Waffen-SS men.
Core, a message which, at least in my divisions, never had been given during all the...
For the Western Allies, the initial thing was quite clear. The Waffen-SS was a huge criminal organization, and its veterans should be excluded from all sorts of civil service pensions or public employment because they were the ones who built Nazi Germany on a lot of brutality, and they could turn against the government any day. But West Germany's rapid reconstruction soon collided with the practical realities. Reintegrating millions and millions of demobilized soldiers was necessary for stability as the Cold War deepened. Political pragmatism began to outweigh this strict denazification. The new state needed votes, and veterans represented a huge voting bloc by the early 1950s. Political debates over veteran welfare dominated the place. Thus, the Federal War Victim Relief Act of 1950. This was designed to support disabled military veterans and war widows, and it sparked huge controversy. The main question was, should Waffen-SS men receive benefits like regular soldiers or not? Conservative politicians, including Chancellor Conrad, eventually agreed that excluding them risked another large organized body going away. In 1953, Conrad publicly declared that Waffen-SS men had the same thing as other soldiers because they fought just as hard. The statement carried huge symbolic weight. It signaled West Germany's quiet shift towards normalizing Waffen-SS veterans as part of the broader soldier community. In practice, it meant that many former SS men would now be able to claim limited pensions, especially those who demonstrated post-1930 conscription. Then came 1956, when the issue extended to a whole new level. West Germany's modern military was having a lot of issues. The question arose, should ex-SS men serve again? In theory, yes. In practice, only a fraction were accepted. Records show that by September 1956, out of 3,117 former Waffen-SS applicants, just shy of 500 were approved. The rest were rejected for ideological concerns, criminal records, or pressure from the Allied advisors, who feared that this new army would be inheriting a tainted legacy. Those who made it back into uniform typically kept quiet about their wartime pasts, understanding that disclosure could even end their careers.
How you doing? I seen you a few years ago. You don't have to get up. You don't have to get up. No. So.
Beyond the official structures, former Waffen-SS men found work in factories, construction, or small businesses. Their military discipline and networks of former comrades somewhat helped them live and not die of starvation or hunger. Social stigma was everywhere in towns and cities across West Germany. Many avoided discussing their service, blending into the silence that characterized the 1950s, which was a decade when most Germans preferred looking forward rather than looking at the past. For many victims throughout the regime, the idea that Waffen-SS veterans could collect state pensions felt like a huge betrayal. Survivor organizations and left-leaning newspapers condemned the whole policy, while conservative outlets also defended it as a necessary reconciliation. Historians note that economic reintegration often came decades before any moral understanding. But in the early 1950s, something interesting happened, and it is what most people weren't expecting. Before we talk about that, subscribe to the channel because this changed Germany's military as a whole. Veterans Lobby. In the early 1950s, as West Germany came back from ruins, former Waffen-SS members officially reorganized in 1956, a group led by Paul Hauser, Otto Kamm, and Felix Steiner called HIAG, which had a huge German name, so we are not going to get deep into that. It roughly translates as Mutual Aid Association of Former SS Members. HIAG started as a welfare organization supporting comrades who were denied state pensions and benefits, but it quickly evolved into something larger, which was a political and historical lobby. Its founders were former generals who were articulate, well-connected men who believed that the Waffen-SS had been unfairly condemned as criminals. Their central argument was simple but powerful. The Waffen-SS had been an apolitical fighting force, soldiers like any other who would simply follow orders and fight for Germany. This narrative found a huge audience. West Germany's conservative politicians faced tight elections and were keen to mobilize veterans' votes. They began quoting HIAG. An important chancellor also met privately with its leaders, and prominent figures like Franz Josef Strauss addressed veteran rallies. Then we had Adenauer's 1953 public comment that Waffen-SS men had fought as soldiers just like others, and it was partially the result of intense Hayag lobbying. By the mid-1950s, Hayag had branches across West Germany and claimed tens of thousands of members. It published magazines called The Volunteer, organized reunions, and financed publications of memoirs of the reformed SS divisions as elite military units rather than ideological forces. Paul Hauser's 1953 book, Soldiers Like Any Other, also became one of the most popular ideas that the Waffen-SS was simply a military organization divorced from Nazi ideology and war crimes. The influence of this lobby peaked in the 1960s, with some former SS officers securing official public positions. The organization had successfully shifted public perception, at least temporarily, but as Germany's younger generation began confronting the Nazi past more and more during the 1970s, public tolerance started becoming less. Historians and journalists started exposing Hayag's revisionist tendencies and efforts to minimize the documented war crimes.
Once the elite of Hitler's combat troops, these former SS members are now old men. Every year for the past 5, they've held a reunion here in Bad Hersfeld, a fraternal get-together.
In 1978, an investigation revealed Hayag's deep political ties and attempts to pressure officials on pension reforms. This scandal marked a turning point because mainstream political parties began distancing themselves, and Haig's credibility weakened to a huge degree. Yet the group remained active for another decade, sustained by aging veterans who were determined to defend their version of history and secure recognition that they had been unjustly denied. By the 1980s, Hayag's membership was already coming to an end, and members were dying every year. The association fought local battles over memorials and cemetery plaques while anti-fascist organizations protested Waffen-SS reunions. In 1992, they were facing destroyed ranks and widespread public disapproval, so this organization finally came to an end. The legacy. When Hayag disbanded in 1992, many believed that the debate over the Waffen-SS would finally be over, but they were wrong. The legacy of those men and the myths surrounding them proved remarkably persistent. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, reunified Germany began confronting its past. Time, its wartime past, was discussed much more openly. Newly opened archives and survivor testimonies revealed how Waffen-SS units operated alongside security, police, and other organizations, with the focus on mobile killing squads, dispelling the long-standing myth of a clean and purely military force. Even as scholarship dismantled these illusions, new controversies emerged in the 1990s. Journalists discovered that some former Waffen-SS members were still receiving state pensions under the old Federal War Victims Relief Act. Reports in the New York Times also sparked outrage, especially when it became clear that many Holocaust survivors had never received comparable compensation. Successive German governments debated reform, but the pension laws rooted in post-war legal compromises proved difficult to undo. Inside Germany, attitudes shifted again by the 2000s. Open admiration for the Waffen-SS was socially taboo. Displaying the SS symbol was banned under Section 86A, and today, few Waffen-SS veterans remain alive. Their associations have vanished, but their legacy still endures in debates, books, and myths that still surround them. Do you think history should have been a little bit light on these men? Let us know in the comments down below, and subscribe to the channel because we cover every dark story of the past in these videos.